There might be a delay.
I did wonder if there was going to be a delay. Aha, I
Hello.
think that's working now. Let me just check. Yes, behaving now. Okay, so when I do this talk, I usually say to people, does anyone resonate with this phrase? And there might be a few show of hands, and obviously I can't necessarily see you all, so I'll just pretend that a few of you put your hands up. And hate is a strong word, so you might resonate more with, you might say you dislike sales or you struggle with it, or you're put off by the process, or you simply dread it. I know freelancers who they love being self-employed, but sales is their least favorite part of the job. And I know people who'd love to be self-employed, but sales and networking is what's scaring them off doing that, which is really sad because it could be something that a hurdle they could easily sort of jump over, and it might be something that's what's putting them off and stopping them doing their dream. So there's me. Hello, in case you can tell. So this is the sort of typical intro slide. So I've been doing SEO for over 11 years full time. That stands for search engine optimization. In a nutshell, it's the process of improving a website's visibility in search engines such as Google. Before I continue, and I meant to say this on my previous slide, I'm working from home like everyone else, and I've got 2 young kids. The door is closed. The stairgate is also closed, but they might breach my defenses, and I might have a bit of a situation with that guy on the famous BBC interview where all his kids just suddenly rush in and see him in the middle of the talk. So fingers crossed that doesn't happen, but word of warning if it does, and we'll deal with that if and when it happens. Where was I? Yes. So doing SEO, I started off my career working at a couple of agencies, and I had a brief stint at confused.com. And then around May 2013, my parents are self-employed, my brother's self-employed. I kind of inspired by them, I followed suit, and I've been a freelancer for the last 7-ish years ever since. I'm a member of the fantastic Welsh Ice in Caerphilly, which is a co-working space, startup hub kind of place. And I'm also a bit of a mentor there as well. So anyone who's new to ICE or is setting up as a freelancer, I kind of help them out with that as well. I blog very, very occasionally these days on my own SEO blog called SEOno. I usually organize Cardiff SEO meetup of SEOs in Cardiff, as the name suggests. Obviously, that's kind of on hold at the moment. And I'm toying with the idea of doing some online ones, but I think at the moment I'm happy with just riding this out and then doing some after lockdown, latter half of the year kind of thing. And I've also written a book. So about this time last year, I self-published a book called Anti-Sell, which gives networking tips to people who don't like networking, based on my experiences and how I've gotten by, given that I'm not the biggest fan of sales and networking. And the talk is kind of, will be kind of touching upon bits of the book and related to that. So the really important disclaimer is I'm not a salesperson. I'm just a regular, typical freelancer. So I know that, most probably talks from sales and networking are from like people who've been business development managers for 20 years and they know all the cool tricks of the trade. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book is I just wanted to tell my story, and I don't consider myself an overly confident salesperson. But that doesn't mean to say that I can't still network and sell effectively, but just in a different alternative way. But it's important that I say that so, you don't think I'm some sort of like sales guru, or guru is a horrible word, but you know what I mean. So the first thing to cover off, I think, is why do people hate sales so much? So when I started out, it was the bit that I was nervous about. I could do SEO, and I could do client relationship management and stuff like that. And I'd done it in my previous jobs, and I wasn't put off by doing admin or finances. And, obviously with the finances and I have hired an accountant to help out, but sales was the bit ironically, despite working in marketing, sales was the bit that I was probably the most anxious about. And I thought it was just me, but then more and more I chatted to freelancers and small business owners and realized, no, they're the same. And I even dug this out of a Facebook group called Freelance Heroes, where they used to do polls. This was from nearly just under 2 years ago now. In the last few months, what's been your biggest challenge? Winning by a landslide, finding new customers. And then a few months later, which area of your freelance business are you least skillful at and enjoy the least? Winning by a landslide, finding new leads. And then Another one more, I say more recently, still about a year ago. What area of your business growth do you find most challenging? Finding and securing clients and work. And again, it's like the number one by considerable margin. But why? I think there's a lot of reasons, but the one thing that's kind of put me off sales is its image. Some of you might recognize this scene. You might recognize the actor. That's a young Alec Baldwin. The movie's called Glengarry Glen Ross. If you don't recognize the name of the movie, you'll probably recognize some of its famous quotes from the scene, which is ABC, always be closing, and that coffee is for closers. And one of the lines they say, it's a room full of salespeople, and they're saying, oh, whoever gets the most sales, first prize wins a holiday, second prize wins a fancy set of steak knives, and third place wins you're fired. And it's a really brutal, cutthroat, competitive environment. And for somebody like me and for other people, that's really intimidating and really it makes you think, oh gosh, do I have to be like that as well? And it's not just that movie. The Pursuit of Happiness, based on a true story, Will Smith and his son are homeless, and while he's trying to obviously raise his son on the streets, he gets a fancy job where he has to cold call a bunch of people. It's set in the 80s, and he has to cold call like the receptionist of big companies, try and work his way up as CEO and schmooze on the phone and all of that. And then perhaps a very famous example more recently is The Wolf of Wall Street, again, based on a true story. Leonardo DiCaprio plays the titular wolf. And they're selling penny stocks and, calling up people at random and try and say, oh, you got to buy this thing, you got to buy this thing. Oh no, you're going to lose money if you don't, and put a lot of pressure on people. And it comes across as manipulative. It comes across as sleazy. It's something that I personally don't resonate with. And, obviously popular culture is exaggerated, but you go onto Amazon, you look at the books for under the sales techniques category, and the number one result is The Real Life Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort. And it's his book. And it almost justifies, it almost makes you think, is that the way it's got to be? Is that the way I've got to sell? No, screw that. That slide was a little less family friendly before. It was a different word than screw. In my experience, the best way to sell is not to sell. Let that sink in. The best way to sell is not to sell. Sounds cheesy, sounds a bit silly. It's the way I kind of work towards when I do networking and sales. And it's, I've been doing this now for 7 years and somehow I've survived. So hopefully it's, obviously I must have been doing something right. Before we move on I'll give you some tips and some ideas of the kinds of things you can do. It's almost like, let's talk about what networking is and what it isn't. It's really important to remember that networking does not necessarily equal just business networking events and stuff like BNI. I don't mean that as a negative thing towards stuff like BNI. BNI, just to explain, is it's a global group. There's about half a dozen groups or chapters in South Wales alone, where it's a business networking event where people go along, usually in the morning, give a 60-second elevator pitch, try and pass like leads and referrals to their other members, and likewise they'll pass leads, things like that back. I often joke it's the Marmite of networking, because I know some people who love it. I know some people who absolutely hate it. I used to be a member years ago and I actually really liked it. So, it's not like, if you hear somebody say it's like the worst thing in the world ever, that might not necessarily be the case. But yeah, I've seen countless times on forums and Facebook groups where somebody says, right, I've started my business, I need to go networking. What business networking events do I need to go to? As if like that's the only place where the only kind of place where networking happens. I couldn't be further from the truth. Networking can happen in any shape or form, so long as you're having a conversation with someone and you're talking about, or they're potentially getting to know you and feeling more comfortable and confident to pass you work, then that's networking. It doesn't have to take place in a business networking event or anything like that. So you can kind of craft it and make it into your own. A few examples of online networking include these. Some of these you might be looking at them and going, what? Some of them are more obvious. So Facebook groups. So if there's Facebook groups where people can go on and ask questions and ask for advice, you might be able to help out and, show off your expertise and your know-how by, if someone, I'll give you a few examples later, but if there was a group where somebody was asking for SEO help, then I might be able to help them. Webinars, online meetups. Obviously, in lieu of offline face-to-face events and meetups, a lot of people are moving their events online. Sometimes you can network during like the text chats like we have in this one, by just asking questions and getting to know people. Talk more about that later. Twitter Q&A chats. So these are kind of the hashtag chats, like one I used to go to a lot was called Blog Hour, where they'd ask like 6 random questions about blogging once a week. And people jump in and answer the questions, and you can respond to other people. You can, have reply to other people and reply to their answers, and then have a little bit of a debate or a little bit of chat that way. Community focused content creation. So this is kind of content where going beyond just like regular blogging, it's you're creating stuff that helps your community, whether it's on a local level. So for me, helping people in Cardiff, or helping people in the industry. So helping people, in my case, in the SEO industry, doing tools and creating stuff like that is a good way to get your name out there. A lot of these aren't just networking tactics. They're obviously marketing tactics and branding, personal branding kind of tactics as well. And I know what you're thinking. How the heck are podcasts a networking thing? Well, it sounds ridiculous. Like, it's like listening to the radio. How is that networking? I'll go into more detail about that later. And when I explain it, hopefully it'll make a bit more sense. The important thing to remember is it's not just going to these places. It's what you do when you get there. So I could easily say to you, go on, join a Facebook group. And you join a Facebook group and you go, hey, everyone buy my stuff. And, they're not going to like that necessarily. So obviously, you need to be careful about how you network with people, how you sort of put yourself out there, and things like that, really. Let me just remind myself. Yeah, okay. So we've got I think I counted about 11-ish tips. I lost count, and I think I just added some in, sprinkled some in somewhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of talk, rather than, let me go back to the previous slide. So instead of saying, this is what you do for Facebook groups, this is what you do for webinars, this is what you do for other things, et cetera, a lot of the tips kind of overlap and cross over. So rather than cover each tactic or place you can network, I will go over things you can do and good stuff to know. And then I'll use examples from that list. So I might use an example of a Facebook group, an example of a Twitter chat, things like that. So let me have a sip of water. Tip 1, to be honest with you, this is probably one of my strongest tips, and it's worked wonders for me. So get involved with what I call semi-related activities or industries. What I mean here is I'm an SEO, but really good referral partners for me aren't just other SEOs. They are web designers. They are digital marketers who do other stuff. They are digital PRs and things like that. I have had the pleasure and honor of speaking at a very big conference in Brighton that happens twice a year called Brighton SEO. That's not me in the photo, obviously. I was trying to find a photo where one of the smaller stages is shown. The big stage, there's about 4,000 people go every 6 months. The big stage is huge. It's like 2,000 people. It's like a massive hall. And then the smaller stages, even though they're called smaller stages, they're still huge. There's probably a few hundred people there. And I spoke twice, I think back in like 2015, 2016 kind of time, each time to an audience of about that size. When I did the maths afterwards, so let's say that, I spoke it twice, combined, there was an audience of about 500 people. As far as I know, I only got one inquiry from it, which was where somebody had said, I saw you talk about Brighton SEO. I'd like to hire you for some work. And don't get me wrong, being able to say that I've spoken at Brighton SEO is a big, mighty badge of honor and prestige in the industry, and there's other benefits as well. And there might be that I got more Twitter followers, and then months later someone became an inquiry because then they kept in touch. But as far as I know, with people actually saying, oh, I saw your talk, one inquiry. Counteract that with the time I spoke at a local web developer meetup called Unified Diff. I'm not sure if it's going anymore, or even before the lockdown, I think it was kind of put on hold, or they just did very infrequent events. But it's a meetup of web and software developers. There was about 50 people in the room, which, is still good for a small local meetup. The venue had about space for 50 people. So it was considered a sellout event. And I did a talk that was giving SEO advice to web developers specifically. And I was quite proud of the talk. I do. For those of you who remember Choose Your Own Adventure style books, because I wasn't sure what topics to cover, because I didn't want to just choose 4 topics or something and then find out that the whole audience already knew them. I basically presented 12 topics. They got to choose, and then we covered like 3 or 4. So that was a bit more challenging for me, because I had to sort of revise and research a lot more in advance, rather than just, knew that the talk would go from start to finish in one linear direction. After that meetup, bearing in mind there was probably like only 50 people. In the following 24, 48 hours, there was probably about 6 people who got in touch who said, I saw your talk, or somebody told me about your talk and told me to get in touch with you about SEO. So as you can see the maths there was probably like 10% of the audience that Brighton SEO had, but 6 times the inquiries. And I honestly think a lot of it came down to the fact that speaking at an SEO event is great. I do SEO, speaking at an SEO event makes a lot of sense. But from a networking point of view, I was mostly presenting in front of peers and even competitors, other freelancers, other agencies. Don't get me wrong, there'd obviously be some in-house people there as well and potential clients, but I think the vast majority of people who were there were agencies and freelancers. At the web developer meetup, I might be the only SEO person they know. I might be the only SEO person doing an SEO themed talk to that audience at that meetup for like all year. So it might be the case then that whole room of people is just like, oh, now I know if anyone needs SEO advice, I'll think of Steve. So I think makes what made a really big difference there. And I crossed out meetup, because these slides I've used before when talking about offline examples. Crossed out meetup every time, because it doesn't have to be a meetup, it could be a webinar. The other things I've done is I spoke at a Cardiff WordPress meetup about how to use an SEO plugin more effectively. Spoken at e-commerce and online business meetups. You could speak at something like a startup meetup or a webinar, or I could do that kind of thing. I spoke at a PR meetup. PRs are that one important part of SEO is called link building. It's trying to get people to link to your website, and PRs obviously do big, extravagant campaigns, which might encourage people linking to a website or a page of a website. So they are naturally really good link builders. So I gave a talk about that, and a design meetup as well, where it was kind of on the subject of web design. Other things I've done and kind of joined, there was an amazing web developer conference. I think it was a one-off a few years ago called The Business of Web Design. So it wasn't about how to do web design, but how to run a web design business. And I was the only, it was like 100 people there, and I'd say that it was me and like 99 other web designers. And even though you think, well, that's a bit silly because it's a conference about how to run a web design business and I'm an SEO, to be honest, a lot of the advice was transferable, because it was things like how to look after clients, should you charge time-based pricing or value-based pricing. So I still got a lot of value by being an attendee at the conference, and then the networking was amazing afterwards, because I was, the important thing is not, I wasn't there like trying to schmooze and work the room and hand out business cards. I just get and chatting to a few people and ask them about who they are, and they'd ask me about me, and I'd say, oh, I do SEO, and then instinctively they might just say, oh, I have an SEO question actually, answer it there and then, keep in touch after that, and network that way really. Cardiff-based entrepreneurship group. So there's a popular group on Facebook called Cardiff Start. They have a very, very strict no self-promotion policy, but if someone asks for a little bit of SEO help, then I might jump in and help them out, but not sell myself and not be like, oh, you can hire me and I can help you, but just help them a little bit for free. Freelancer communities as well. So freelancers of all stripes and industries. Some of them might have SEO questions. My co-working space has a private members group on Facebook, which even before the lockdown was amazing, because the place where I'm based is 2 co-working spaces, like 2 separate rooms, and it has they also let out a lot of offices. So even if I was there on a busy day, I probably only see like 20% of the people who are there. I only pre-lockdown, I could only really went along like 2-3 times a week as well. So I wasn't there 5 days a week. And the Facebook group is great because obviously I can keep in touch with people who I might not necessarily see regularly otherwise. And obviously now with the lockdown, it's even more critical and important that everyone's kind of still able to keep in touch without seeing each other in person, because obviously the space closed as soon as the lockdown was announced. The important point I'm trying to make here is it's not just SEO groups and SEO communities. I might just think, I'll join 10 SEO Facebook groups all about SEO on Facebook, but and that's great. I can learn, I can help, but it might not necessarily be a good networking tactic. But if I go and help out general freelancer or startup communities, those people might then remember me as the SEO the SEO person who helped them out that time. Tip 2, if you're nervous about getting involved, because I know quite a few people who are nervous about networking, sort of take a step back first of all and just observe. When I give this advice, usually, and I'll go back to that slide in a second. When I give this advice, usually I mean in the context of networking, face-to-face meetings, where if you're nervous about going, what you could do is go with a friend. So at the very least, you're not walking into a room full of strangers. You know at least one person. And but it's true for webinars as well. Like if you're a bit nervous about joining on a webinar where it's one where like people can talk, maybe go in if you know other people who are there. So from more of an online perspective, one thing you could do is watch old episodes first. So a few years ago, I really wanted to get involved with a SEO webinar that was weekly, and I was really shy and nervous about going in. I didn't want to make a fool of myself. So to get familiar with sort of the layout and what it was like and how it worked, I watched a few of their episodes. It was run by Google Hangouts, and then the episodes were published on YouTube afterwards. So I watched some old episodes on YouTube. And then I kind of became a lurker, for lack of a better word. So I join in, but I wouldn't contribute at all. I just kind of see what it was like when it was going live. Then I got to the point where I kind of maybe put a message or two out in the chat box. And this was a type of webinar where, in addition to the guest and the host, they would also be happy for people to contribute questions with their video on and their mic on. So I then started to do that. And I remember one time I plucked up the courage to actually ask a question and talk. And it sounds a bit ridiculous and a bit long-winded, but it made a difference. Then if straight away the first time I jumped on and I did something silly or pressed the wrong button and it was a bit embarrassing. So if you're a little bit nervous, just kind of don't rush into it and kind of get an idea of what the webinar you've got your eye on is like first of all, and then you can move into actually contributing more directly. Sometimes not necessarily webinars, but meetups and events publish you can get an flavor of the attendee list in advance. So meetup.com, if you're a member of a group and say that you're going to attend that meetup, whether it's offline in the old days or online at the moment, then you can get an idea of who else is there, and you might look and you might say, actually, I know 3 or 4 people going, and that's a bit of a confidence boost as well, because that you're not going to be in a room full of strangers and there's a few people you can talk to. You can do the same with social media, so you can check their social media at people. Is there a hashtag of people talking on the hashtag saying, looking forward to such and such webinar tonight, and then that person's probably going as well. And again, the bit like I touched upon before coming on the slide, you can ask a friend to jump in with you, and that can kind of soften the blow. When it comes to offline face-to-face meetups, the risk of going with a friend is that you end up just spending all your time talking to your friend, and that defeats the object of networking at a networking event. But at the same time, if they know a lot of people already, they can actually help with the sort of introducing and help with the sort of breaking the ice and introducing you to people. So that's something to bear in mind as well. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Tip 3, don't just go along and attend stuff. If you can, run stuff. So run your own webinar, run your own event or meetup, run your own something else. I'll give you an example of Cardiff SEO Meet. So I've been running Cardiff SEO Meet for a few years now, obviously on hold at the moment because of the you-know-what. And I did it because I enjoyed doing it. Truth be told, before I got into SEO, I wanted to get into events management. But I used to run some events at uni and I really loved it. But I graduated around the time of the credit crunch recession about 12 years ago and struggled to get a job, couldn't get a job for the life of me. And then I landed in SEO. And I've just been doing SEO ever since. But I've always liked events, so it made sense for me. It felt very natural and felt like a lot of fun to run SEO events. And a lot of people who come are people I already knew. I'd invite speakers who are local, people I already knew, people who might be from further afield in the UK. And I remember one time, these 3 guys used to come along to some of the earlier events, and they're really friendly, really chummy. Would always say to me, thank you so much for putting this on, Steve, really appreciate it. It's a lot of hard work and stuff. And I'd be like, oh, thank you. Never really knew who they were or where they worked. And then at the end of one event, they said, oh, we should really get you in and you can help us out. We work for household name company, which I didn't even realize was based in Cardiff. And I was like, oh my gosh. And they were like, well, why don't you come in, meet our boss, the marketing manager, head of marketing. We'll take it from there. And I had the meeting with their boss, and truth be told, it was probably one of the easiest sales meetings I've ever had, because I think that those guys had pretty much already sold me internally and said, oh yeah, we need SEO. There's this guy, Steve. We've met him he runs the SEO meetup. And in the end, it was less of a sales meeting, and it was almost like a meet and greet and a kind of get to know me and, right, okay, this is the work we want you to do. And that is such a stronger and a more comfortable and confident position to be in than knowing that you're one of a number of freelancers or agencies fighting for a bit of work and pitching. So the more you kind of do this kind of stuff, the less sort of almost competition you have, in that people will just kind of seek you out and think, well, we want to work with you specifically, which has happened to me a few times, which, and I'm not saying that as a humble brag, I'm really grateful and consider that like absolutely amazing. But it is, I think doing things like Cardiff SEO Meet has helped, because even though I don't tend to do a talk, I am the host. I manage the Twitter and the meetup group. I introduce the speakers. So I still get a kind of a lot of sort of airtime, if you will, being the person running the show. And tip 4, if you are running stuff such as your own event, your own podcast, your own webinar, you can be really cheeky in that the people you invite at the event or the podcast or what have you could be people you want to get on the radar of. So for example, if I ran an SEO podcast where I interview people who do SEO in the South Wales area, what's stopping me from inviting the head of SEO at Admiral, or the head of SEO at confused.com, or the head of SEO at gocompare.com, all 3 of whom are based in Cardiff, Newport, South Wales kind of area. At the very least, worst case scenario is they're not interested, they don't want to do it. At the very least, we do the interview, and it ends up being a really good podcast episode. But that person may not have known who I was, but now they know who I am. And it's a really sort of cheeky and sneaky way to get on somebody's radar, where the next time that person's thinking, right, we need to outsource some SEO, they'll think, oh, who was the guy who did the podcast? Oh yeah, it was Steve. Oh, maybe we should chat to Steve. So you can be a bit like clever and cunning about the way you do it. With Cardiff SEO Meet, I mostly put on people that I know and people that I know in the industry. And, I put on other freelancers, I put on agency people, so I put on competitors. But if I wanted to, there's nothing stopping me from putting on all heads of departments on big companies, and hope that, they remember me in the future. And not just that, so that they might have followers and friends who are also heads of SEO and marketing in other big companies. So when they listen to the episode, they get to know who I am that way as well. A really good example of this, I don't know if I've even chatted to him about me using him as an example, so I hope he doesn't mind, is a guy I know called Steve Folland. He's an audio and video production kind of guy. He does voiceover work, that kind of stuff. He runs a website, Being Freelance, which is a podcast, a Facebook group, and he also does a vlog as well. And the podcast is probably the best and most well-known avenue of all those things, where he every week, not every week because he takes breaks and stuff, but usually during a season, whatever he calls it, every week he interviews a different freelancer about their experience freelancing. And I'm fortunate to say that I was a guest probably a few months ago, a year ago. And there's 2 aspects to this. So he's an audio and visual guy. So by running a podcast, he's showcasing his expertise. By doing a vlog, same thing. But he's also every person he speaks to, if they didn't know who he was previously, now knows who he is. And I get the impression of Steve, he's a very genuine, authentic guy. I don't think he's doing this because he's like, aha, I only want to network with these people. I don't care about them otherwise, like some sort of evil villain. I genuinely think he does it because he loves doing it. But I'd be amazed if at least one person didn't pass him a really good referral, because they were thinking one day, what audio or visual video production people do I know? Oh yeah, there's Steve of Being Freelance. So he's a really good example of that. And he kind of does a triple whammy of mixing them all together. So obviously the Facebook group will talk about the podcast and the blog and that kind of thing. So it's really cool how they all kind of interlink and intersect. Tip 5. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. If Hannah, if I end up like taking too long, I'll gloss over some of the later tips. Tip 5: create content that benefits your community, and I'll share a few examples of this and how this can be a good way to get noticed as well. So I'm a big fan of co-working under more usual circumstances, and I created this list and map of all the co-working spaces in South Wales. And this is using Google Maps has a platform called Google My Maps, where you can create your own custom maps, and you can either keep them private for personal use, or make them public. And I made this public. I embedded it on the page. You can zoom in. You can see what's around Cardiff. You can see what's around Swansea and the valleys, etc., etc. And there's also a list of the details of each one. I have also, again, this is kind of not doing too well at the moment, but it's a calendar of all the tech events in South Wales, like meetups, conferences. This is mostly automated. So it's a $50 a year plugin, pulls in the details from meetup.com and Eventbrite. So when AI Wales publishes a new event, it automatically gets added to this calendar. And there's all sorts. So there's like women in tech meetups, there's Python, data and privacy talks, agile, Bitcoin, Amazon Web Services, and SEO. So it's a cheeky way for me to promote my own SEO events as well. But the good thing is like, even if I don't get a chance to kind of keep an eye on this, it requires very minimal upkeep, and it kind of just runs itself. And it's some examples of where this is done really well is in the Cardiff Start group, which, as I said earlier, is got really strict self-promotion policies. If you go in there and start just dumping your links to your videos and your blogs, you'll probably get banned almost immediately. But if someone goes in and says, can anyone recommend a co-working space? Chances are someone will share a link to my list and map because it's genuinely useful to people. And they'll say, Steve's done a really good breakdown here of all of the different ones. So that's that one in the top left. The one in the bottom right it's a bit of a cheeky way to self-promote without self-promoting, in that the person was saying, I've got an event coming up soon. And I left a comment saying, do you want me to add your event to my calendar of upcoming events? And obviously their response is, well, yeah, please, it's free publicity and I'm doing them a favor. It's also a bit of a cheeky way for me to sort of name drop myself and mention the website without basically being, it'd be a completely different story if I wrote a post that was like, hey guys, I've got this site that has all these events listed. That looks like I'm just caring about showing off the website and selling myself. But actually saying, I've got this website that might be able to help you, is a bit of a slightly cheeky alternative angle to get away with it. I'll gloss over these next few tips, so I'm not taking up too much time. When you're creating content like blogging, have your own domain for it. So I've got seono.co.uk for my blog. Before that, in my early days of blogging, I had something like steviephil.wordpress.com, which is okay, but it's not great because, it's not 100% my brand. And I know people who are really keen to blog and they don't like the idea of setting up a blog. So they'll go, I'll just start posting on Medium. But this might be the paranoid skeptic in me talking, but you never know if in the future Medium might start charging or something happens and you lose all your past posts. Or LinkedIn, the same thing happens to them with LinkedIn posts. By publishing it on your own domain, it's yours and it's there for good, essentially, as long as obviously you keep it going. So that's my, critical bit of advice is obviously get your own web domain, set up your own blog and have it on there. If you're doing guest posting, which I do encourage, the risk is obviously once you give them the content and they upload it, it's in their hands. So if their website goes offline one day, or somebody decides they have a content cull and delete the post that you provided, you've got no control of whether that post will just randomly disappear one day. I always recommend saving a copy of the guest posts. And you can also use the Wayback Machine to retrieve lost posts. This was handy for me when a really popular guest post I wrote for somebody disappeared one day. They sold their blog to somebody else, and the person with a new blog just, even though they just bought it and paid a lot of money for this blog, they just decided to close it down, which is a bit weird. But it meant that I lost the post. But if I wanted to, I could retrieve it and potentially repost it myself, or maybe offer it to someone else, rather than it disappear into the ether forever. Tip 7, get your testimonials on LinkedIn first. So the description for the event said I was going to talk about LinkedIn. I don't do a huge amount on LinkedIn, if I'm being honest with you. I will cover some of the stuff I do in a minute. But one thing I do love about LinkedIn is the recommendation section. And when you're asking people and happy clients for testimonials, instead of just sending them an email and saying, oh, can you just reply to this email with your thoughts? And then great, you've got the text and you can put it on your website. But, it's just there. And also people don't know whether it's legit or not, unless they actually got in touch with the person and said, oh, did this person actually do work for you? And were they actually really good? You could have made it up. Whereas if it's attached to, so what I tend to do is I ask people to leave a recommendation on LinkedIn first and then reuse that text on my website. It's tied to a social profile, which, is harder to fake. I know that, there are fake LinkedIn profiles out there. Someone the other day said that somebody was trying to connect with them and they had the profile picture of Tom Cruise. You're not fooling anyone, Mr. Cruise. Mr. Cruise. You're not doing link building. We know that that's not the case. But yeah, it's if say local CEOs of local companies are all giving you recommendations, and it's definitely their profile, then it shows that it's a legitimate, authentic testimonial. You've not just made it up. I tend to kind of steering away from networking now, I appreciate, but just another tip is in proposals, I tend to include a link. I might include a few testimonials and I try and tailor them to the proposal I'm writing. So depending on the industry or the type of work, I might include the testimonials that kind of closely align with those. And then say, find out more on LinkedIn, which even if the person doesn't click through to go to LinkedIn, is a bit of a prompt and a bit of a nod for them to make think, okay, this person's got recommendations on LinkedIn as well. So it kind of helps to kind of boost your profile a little bit and make you look that you obviously know what you're doing and people like working with you. Tip 8, don't sell yourself too heavily. Don't go around telling everyone that you're amazing, because people just won't like that. But if you are taking the time to write a blog post, share it on your Twitter, share it on your LinkedIn, blow that trumpet, be proud of what you share. Just don't obviously overdo it. Don't be, braggy and that kind of things. I give an idea of what I do. When I publish a new blog post, obviously I tweet it, I put it on LinkedIn. I also tend to recycle posts to old links. I kind of do from the archives, and the name of the post, and people can see that it's from like 2016 or something and not a recent post. But if the advice is still relevant, there's no harm in kind of sharing those as well. I share event stuff and book stuff and any sort of company news stuff that I have as well. And primarily I share it on Twitter. On LinkedIn, I'll just kind of share a link to a blog post on my blog as opposed to writing a LinkedIn post. Truth be told, I've not done a lot of that. It's not to say that it doesn't work, but I'm probably not the best person to be talking about doing that kind of thing, so I've not done a lot of it. I put question marks next to Facebook and Instagram because I wouldn't necessarily, Facebook, I don't have a Facebook page for my business. It's just a Facebook profile. So I have a Steve Morgan profile. Unless it was a blog post that was say about, SEO for like, if you're thinking of starting a business or something like that, where friends and family members might be interested. I probably wouldn't share it on Facebook because it is mostly friends and family. If it was a technical SEO post, they're not going to care if I put a link to that in my Facebook. In fact, they might put them off. They might then hide me or mute me or whatever the terminology is. And Instagram as well, I don't tend to use a lot. I tend to be more of a Twitter user and have been for years. But that's not to say that, I know some people do really well on Instagram and less on Twitter. So find what works for you and try out different things and give it a go, really. Tip 9, I recommend be consistent across platforms. So what I mean here is in terms of like your identity and your branding. I tend to always use it. It might look a bit boring, but I tend to always use the same profile picture across all social media, mainly for the fact that if, say, somebody knows me on Twitter and then they see me in a Facebook group, they immediately recognize that it's me. I've seen some people who use a completely different photo for Facebook, a completely different photo for LinkedIn, and sometimes I don't necessarily recognize them straight away, or I might think that they're another, if they've got a common name, I don't know, John Smith, I might think it's another John Smith. I might not realize it's the John Smith that I already know through Twitter, for example. So that's, you may not want to do that. I think that works well for me. I did have somebody say to me once that they saw me contribute to a Facebook group, then somebody retweeted me, And then I popped up on LinkedIn as well. So they kind of, they spotted me on multiple platforms. And I think probably having the same profile picture helped with that. Because if, as I said, different profile picture each time, they might not have connected the dots necessarily. I'll gloss over these ones because they're covered a bit more in the book and conscious of time. So this is a common sense one. Keep it cool. Don't be a jerk. I just wanted an excuse to include a GIF, and showing my age here, it had to be a Bill and Ted GIF as well. I'll tell you a really quick story of a time where I spoke at an event, and at the end of the event, on the stage, one of the sponsors was a bit sort of, it was a bit, you could call it banter, but it was quite harsh, and it almost felt like a bit of a roasting, and people were laughing. I was embarrassed. It wasn't very nice, and I was really annoyed, and I wanted to bite their head off in return because I didn't like the way I'd been treated. And I didn't. I bit my tongue. And then I could have the next day, sometimes it's hard to do that kind of stuff in person, but you think, I'll write a blog post and talk about, or have a moment on Twitter. And again, I didn't. I bit my tongue and I just let it be. And then about a year later, somebody got in touch and passed on a dream client. And they were in the audience of that event. And I think to myself, if I had made a bit of an uproar and sort of bit back and been angry on stage or something like that, then that person might not have passed me that work, because they might have thought, whoa, okay, this guy's, not a friendly, or reasonable guy to work with. So that was a time where, what was I considered a really embarrassing situation still led to a dream client. And more recently as well, I asked for advice on a Facebook group, and the answer I got back was really good and really useful. But the person who gave the answer started it with, "You are confused," which it just really upset me and really angered me, because it just made me feel really stupid. Of course I'm confused. I was asking for advice. I didn't know something and how it worked. That's why I was asking for advice in the first place. But just through those 3 words, I went from, if they didn't include those 3 words, I probably would have been like, "Thank you for your advice. That's incredible. I'll name my next child after you. And I'll tell you, all my friends and family about you." But I was so embarrassed that I deleted the post. And, whenever I see them contribute to like someone else's post, I think, oh gosh, it's them again. And it's just left a really bitter taste in my mouth. So the important thing, I know it's common sense, is just be nice to people. Don't be, try and avoid situations where there's conflict. Try and avoid just belittling or talking down to people. Even if it is a situation, someone's asking for advice and you really, really want to say, you could have Googled that. Just still help them. Just be nice, be kind, and all of that. And as in both those examples, I kind of cover both ways. So don't be a jerk to people, but don't be a jerk back if someone's a jerk to you. Because sometimes, even though it seems like it's fair, and it really can be difficult to let someone get away with somebody being nasty to you, but sometimes it can make you look just as bad, if not worse. So just be careful of that. Tip 11 is another common sense one, I guess, is just have some personality and be personable. At the end of the day, a classic saying from things like BNI and stuff is people buy from people. So I always say, be you as an individual, not just your company as a sort of entity or organization. And it's a bit of a terrible way to show the example, but I put more prominence and effort into me as Steve Morgan than I do as my business Morgan Online Marketing. Because I am the business. I'm a sole trader, and it's my business. I'm a one-person band. I don't have any employees. But also, I've seen people make the mistake of, they start a business and they instinctively think, right, I've got to have a Facebook page. I've got to have a dedicated company Twitter account. And then, and obviously you don't post just your content, because that looks like all you care about is yourself and all you want to do is sell. But some people get around that by just posting like industry news and industry blog posts. But again, that's kind of like, it can be a little bit bland and a little bit boring if that's all you're sharing. If you actually go to the effort of talking to people and engaging, again, it sounds like a really ridiculous common sense thing, but I've seen people who have lots of followers and they do put out good stuff, but they never ever like reply to tweets, or they'll never read other people's tweets and then reply to them. I think people notice, and it makes a big difference if you're actually quite conversational on Twitter rather than just using it as basically a broadcasting platform. Don't be afraid to share non-work stuff. We're human beings at the end of the day. We have our interests, we have our pastimes. I would be bored if if an SEO person only ever tweeted links to other blog posts. But if they talk about what music they like, what films they watched recently, they talk about their family, they talk about what they get up to at the weekends. It's a lot more human, and it's a lot more, I don't know how to describe it. It's just better. Like, obviously you can take it too far. You could share really personal things. I remember somebody once sharing really intimate details of their sex life on their Twitter, which is what they use to promote themselves as a freelancer. And I was like, whoa, okay, maybe let's not get carried away. And politics is a messy one as well, where if people use their Twitter as well as promote themselves as a freelancer, they do a lot of talk about politics. You've got to be careful, and you can take it to the extreme. But I do think, don't be afraid to talk about yourself and who you are and what you do outside of work as well. And as touched upon it before as well, don't just have a work account, have a you account. This is completely anecdotal. I'm sure within 2 minutes, someone could easily find an example to the contrary. But in my experience, when I know someone who runs an agency or is an employee of an agency, they usually have more followers on Twitter as an individual than their business does, because people care about the people behind the business, not just the business itself, if that makes sense. And because I think it's a face and a name tied to a Twitter account is so much better than a brand and a logo, or at least in my experience anyway. Well, I'll wrap up a little bit because I'm conscious of time, and it's nearly 2:00, and I know there might be people with questions. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention offline networking at all, because I know that this lockdown isn't going to last forever. So when things return to normal, I'm a big fan of co-working. Do me a favor, if you don't like the idea of co-working, give it a try, and don't just try one co-working space and try it once and then be like, oh, co-working is horrible. Because it could just be that you went to a bad co-working space, or you went on a bad day. The first co-working space I ever went to was okay. It wasn't great. The second co-working space I went to, I've been there for 7 years. So imagine if I said after the first one I went to, oh, co-working's rubbish, I'm never going again. That would have been such a massive opportunity missed. My strategy, in fact, is I'm based at one full time, and I do try and visit others. So I'm based at Welsh Ice in Caerphilly. I do, from time to time, visit different indie cubes, visit Tramshed Tech, visit Ravel Studio, visit, my mind's drawing a blank, but all the other ones in the local area if you're watching this in, Cardiff. And, it's a good way to kind of keep in touch with people and meet new people, have a different working environment than necessarily always working from my main co-working space or working from home. And then the classic stuff as well, not just business networking events, but thinking as well that meetups and socials you can network at, as well as conferences. Doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to have business networking in the title for it to be a networking thing. So things to remember really quickly, try out different things. So don't just try one thing and put all your eggs in one basket. You might want to try jumping into webinars and helping out in Facebook groups and running your own podcast. And because you might find that one thing you do does really well and the others less so. You don't want to just try one of the things that doesn't work so well. But it's also important to remember networking takes time. Give it a chance. You obviously don't want to be doing something for 2 years and find the whole 2 years that it's done nothing for you. But like BNI, they sign people into contracts of, I think, minimum 12 months. And I think it's not necessarily because they're trying to, get money out of people. It's because sometimes it does take a good 6 months to a year to sort of harbor relationships with people. And I know people who give up BNI after a month or two and say, no, it's not for me. It's not working for me. And what if, a few more weeks could have made all the difference. But it's important to know, do what works best for you. If you don't like the idea of going to a business networking event like BNI, the good news is you don't have to. But if you've always loved the idea of running your own Q&A podcast where you interview people in the industry, let that be your networking thing. If you like the idea of helping out in Facebook groups, let that be your networking thing. You can sort of tailor and adapt networking to be what you want it to be and what you're most comfortable in. Because at the end of the day, the more you play to your passions and your strengths, the better job you'll do. The less sales and networking, that thing that might terrify you now or might have terrified you in the past, no longer feels like sales and networking because it ties in as an enjoyable thing. Like, I treat running Cardiff SEO meets as a networking thing. I love running Cardiff SEO meets, and it's got me leads, it's gotten me clients. And that's great because I hate selling, but it just makes life so much easier. I'll cover a really quick case study. So the book has 8 case studies from some people based local to Cardiff, some people further afield, different kinds of industries, other SEO people, digital marketers, designers, there's a copywriter there, a VA. So there's 8 in the book, and I'll quickly cover Fran's. I think Fran actually did one of the workshops a few weeks ago about, I think it was e-commerce, wasn't that?
Yeah.
Is that right, Hannah? Thank you. Cool. So Fran these days, she's about to work more on her new startup, but she was more of a social media trainer and consultant. And she used to hate sales. She basically, her first ever job was recruitment, which is basically sales. She was rubbish at it. She moved into co-working. She did things like speaking gigs, running workshops. She helped out with people on Facebook groups, and she co-hosted a podcast with her friend all about juggling parenting with running a business. And she found that that's what was then getting her known, getting her leads. And she went from absolutely hating sales to loving it, because she was tying it into things that she actually enjoyed, such as running a podcast, such as running events and speaking at events and co-working. So my final tip for you, because we are pretty much bang on 2:00, is don't sell. My most important tip to you about selling is not to sell. It's about helping people. This is an example I love, because on a Facebook group, somebody asked for advice on networking. What kind of networking stuff could they do? And I wrote a long list. You can see it got chopped off as a see more button. And I didn't mention the book. I could have gone in and said, I've written a book that covers this. And straight away, it looks like all I care about is selling the book and making money. So I gave a bit of advice for free. Then somebody even said, any books you can recommend? Hint, hint, jokey, jokey. And I still kind of went, no, lol. And someone else actually came in and said, well, here's a link to Steve's book if anyone's interested. And that was great, because instead of me looking like I'm just touting my wares, somebody else was doing it for me. Because at the end of the day, the networking dream, the networking nirvana, is you won't even have to sell yourself or network yourself. Other people will do it for you on your behalf, so you don't have to. And that's me done. One last thing I want to mention is that I wrote a book about a year ago called Anti-Sell. A lot of the stuff I've covered today is in the book, but there's also stuff in the book that isn't covered in this. It's on Amazon, Audible, iTunes Store, as paperback, Kindle, and I self-narrated the audiobook as well. If you want to hear me talk for another 3 hours, you may not after the last 45 minutes. And it's pretty well received. It's got a solid 5 out of 5 on Amazon from a few dozen reviews. I'm really chuffed about that. If you are interested or know someone who's interested, the link is anti-sell.com.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Cool. I haven't seen the chat. Should I jump in now?
There's just a lot of people commenting saying that it was really good. They like your post.
Oh, thank you.
Really informative. If anyone has got any questions at the minute before we go, do you want to type them in? And while you're typing, I'll ask one question. Just to give people a chance to type. Twitter hours. So like when you have like hashtag Cardiff hour, hashtag Newport hour, etc.
Yes.
Do you find them useful?
Yeah, well, this is the thing, right, is I like the ones that are like a Q&A format. So like Blog Hour. I'll use a more recent example because Blog Hour isn't going at the moment. So there's one on Wednesday evenings called Freelance Heroes, hashtag Freelance Heroes. And it'll basically be a different subject about freelancing. So obviously the subject recently have been like working from home, mental health, because of obviously everything going on at the moment. And they'll ask 6 questions sort of like every 10 minutes apart. And you reply with the hashtag, and then you can obviously see other people's answers if they use the hashtag, and people can see your answer. When it's the ones, there's some of them, like the ones you mentioned, I think Cardiff Hour might have changed now, and it might be more of a Q&A format, but some of the ones I've seen, some of them are like a just broadcast your message, give us your news kind of thing. And I mentioned this in the book. I say, be careful of those ones, because it's a bit like, it's almost like, imagine if there's 50 people in a room and they've all got megaphones and they're being told to like broadcast their message at the same time. It's a bit like that. It's not with the Q&A ones. People can kind of, answering a question might be showing off their knowledge or their experience and their expertise. But the ones that are just like, just share your news. You'll find somebody's like, oh, we got 50% discount at the moment, or I'm offering copywriting services, or I do websites in WordPress, and it gets a bit spammy, and it's a little bit like overly self-promotional.
Yeah.
So it's not to say don't do those, and there must be people who do those and get something out of it, but just be careful, because there's no harm, I guess, in joining in and putting a tweet out saying, oh, by the way, I wrote this blog post or something like that. But the idea, the good ones are the ones where you kind of have more of a discussion and chat with other people rather than just blasting out your sales message.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to find Twitter hours, I literally just Googled UK Twitter hours or Twitter self-employed Twitter hours, for example. And you can just join in. I know Cardiff Hour, I've done that a couple of times. And for my side business, and it might not have turned into sales, but it was just good promotion without being overly buy, like buy my stuff, buy my things, buy everything I've got on offer. It was a bit more of a conversation, as you say, as opposed to a sales pitch.
Yeah, I think Cardiff Hour, I know the guy who's taken it over, and I think he's pivoting more towards the sort of discussion thing, or there's like a different guest or a different topic every week, which I think is a lot better. But yeah, just be careful of the ones where it is literally just like buy, like you said, or sell.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's a lot of people saying thank you. Lucy Haskins keen to set up something along the lines of a startup marketing.
Yeah,
services to promote.
Thank you, Lucy. I know Lucy personally. She's spoken at Cardiff SEO Meet in the past.
Okay.
So yeah. Hey. So yeah, it's. I was trying to think. I had one thing. About 5 minutes before we started, I realised there's one thing I didn't cover in the slides, which was, it's obviously a bit too, it was too late for me to add it in. So if there aren't any questions, there's one quick thing I'll bolt on, which is I haven't really talked about how to find your target audience or find out that kind of thing. Like who, it's all well and good that I say join Facebook groups, but, and it's going to be different in everyone's situation, but like knowing which Facebook groups to join. There's a cool tip. I mentioned it in the book, but I'll tell you, there's a couple of blog posts about it. There's it's called the assessment chart. So for those of you who already have clients and customers, you make almost like a list of all of your who's your ideal client, and who are the ones who the type of work you enjoyed, the clients who paid well, who understood the way you worked, and things like that. And you almost rank them all from best to worst, and it gives you an idea of, like, say if you've had 15 clients, your top 3 clients, you might think to yourself, actually they're all a certain type of work, or they're all a certain industry. And it could make you think, well, actually from now on, I'm going to try and target those kinds of people. And then obviously the ones at the bottom, nobody's perfect. We all have good and bad clients, unfortunately, good and bad customers, is, kind of, right, what can you do to try and avoid those types of people so you don't end up getting more of them? So I appreciate that's only useful for people who already are in business and already have an idea of who their good and bad customers and clients are. But if you're going to be starting a business, I know it's the classic one. It's just try and think about who your ideal customers are or clients. Where would they hang out? What kind of social media would they be using and stuff like that. So I appreciate that I didn't really cover that in much detail during the talk. So no,
it's good. Always find out who your target market is and who your customer is, definitely. Yeah,
because it's all well and good that I say, join Facebook groups, and then you end up joining Facebook groups where your target audience aren't actually hanging out. So yeah.
We've got one question before we finish.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any tips for staying in touch with your contacts after the networking has happened?
Yeah, so I tend to, if they're on Twitter, give them a follow and maybe just send them a message saying, hey, it was great to meet you the other day, or great to see you in the webinar, and just things like that. LinkedIn as well. I'm really strict with LinkedIn in that I'll only connect with and accept connection requests from people I actually know, or say have met through someone I know really well on Twitter, or somebody who I've met at least once in person at like a networking event. I don't like just adding everyone and anyone randomly, because they could just, within minutes be like, hey, I'm trying to tell you something. So if I had some business cards after an event, say if it was like a networking event, I would see and try and find those people on LinkedIn, try and do it as sooner rather than later. So maybe do it within a day or two rather than like weeks later, in case so much time has moved on, they've forgotten who you are. And personalize the message as well. Don't just be that. I think the standard is like, I want to connect with you on LinkedIn. Obviously say something like, oh, it was great to meet you at the Cardiff Met event the other day. And, maybe we can keep in touch and chat in the future. And it might be that you don't really chat that much in the future, but at least like you're on each other's radar. And also like as well, like, this, again, someone who's kind of more savvy with LinkedIn can help with this. But what I love as well about LinkedIn is seeing mutual connections. So say if there's someone I really want to get on the radar of, and I realize that 3 people I know are second connections, which means that they are connected to me and that person, then you might be able to speak to those people and say, oh, how do you know Joe Blogs? And is there any way you can kind of introduce me, kind of thing? Or do you know what they, like, don't like, so that you know how to sort of gear your networking accordingly? I feel like I've gotten sidetracked from the original question.
No, it's fine. It was just tips on staying in touch. So definitely engage with them on LinkedIn, on Twitter.
Yeah. Facebook's a bit of a funny one, because like I myself use it just for kind of, I'll use my Facebook profile for like chatting to people on Facebook groups, but I'll only really connect with people I, again, know. It'd be a bit weird if a person who randomly saw me on Facebook group did a friend request.
Yeah.
Because I'd be a bit like, who are you and why, because I share like family stuff on there, and that would make me uncomfortable if I just accepted like any old people on there. But yeah, so it's gear it towards what you think makes the most sense and is the most comfortable. LinkedIn is a safe one to do if it's, so long as you actually got to know them and chat to them at the event rather than just like sending them a random request. Twitter tends to be a good one as well.
Definitely. So just kind of maybe engage with them a few days later and just, have a conversation outside of the networking event, and then
yes, sorry, I keep interrupting you. You could even go as far as sending them an email. It doesn't have to necessarily be a LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter connection request. You could just send them an email. Maybe say to them, are you interested in maybe having when things return back to normal, a face-to-face coffee or a quick Zoom call? Some people might be a bit skeptical if straight away you want to jump into like, oh, do you want to have a chat? Because they might think, oh, is this person trying to sell me something? So, but you know better than anyone how, when you got chatting to that person, you might have, gone with them really well to the point where, or realize that there's some synergy where it makes sense to then say to them, hey, listen, we should really have probably a proper sit down and a coffee.
Yeah.
Whoops, something's gone wrong with my screen. Did I freeze then a little bit?
No, you're all right.
All right, cool. Okay.
Still there.
My screen just went black and I was like, no.
Oh, no, you're fine.
But yeah.
Amazing tips. So engage, have conversations.
Yeah, I know a lot of it sounds a bit like really obvious and common sense, but a lot of it is really, at the end of the day, it's just about being careful about how you do it and about, being sensible with it and not being overly salesy.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much. We've got loads of really positive comments about the session.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's really good.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, if you fancy getting Steve's book, we have got a couple of